Recording in progress.
Okay, let's go ahead and start the webinar. Good evening, folks. We're going to just take a few minutes to let folks gather, and then we'll begin. So we'll begin in a couple of minutes. Thank you. Okay, while folks are gathering, I'm going to read some housekeeping remarks for the beginning of the meeting. I'm going to read them in English first, and then we'll have our translation service read the Spanish version. So, good evening, and thank you for participating in our remote public consultation meeting for the Coachella Valley Extreme Non-Attainment Area Plan for the 2008 Ozone Standard. We will do our best to facilitate a smooth meeting with public participation. We have two formats for participation: the Zoom web application, as well as teleconference. Before we begin, I want to review some guidelines and general instructions for the meeting. Please silence your other communication devices, such as your cell or desk phone. This will ensure that we are not hearing any feedback or causing interruption during the meeting. This meeting is being translated in Spanish. To watch or listen to this meeting in the language of your choice, click on the globe icon labeled Interpretation at the bottom of your screen. From there, select the language of your choice. After you select your language, if you hear both languages at the same time, please click Mute Original Audio. For those participating by Zoom phone, if you wish to hear the meeting in Spanish, please use the phone number and meeting ID number posted on the agenda. All participants on Zoom, except for South Coast AQMD staff, will be placed on mute by the host. You will not be able to mute or unmute your line manually. After the staff presentation, we will have opportunity for public comments. Speakers may be limited to a total of 3 minutes or less for public comment. A countdown timer will be displayed on the screen for each public comment. If interpretation is needed, more time will be allotted. For those on Zoom, if you would like to make a public comment on the Zoom screen, please click on the raise hand button. For those calling in by phone, you can dial *9 to signal you would like to comment. Your name or part of your phone number will be called when it is your turn to comment, and the host will unmute your line automatically. Please note, you can hang up or leave the Zoom meeting at any time. Please adhere to the speaker time limit and treat others with courtesy, civility, and respect. Failure to do so can result in your mic being muted and you being dropped from the meeting. Lastly, please be aware that this video conference meeting is being recorded. By participating in this meeting hosted by South Coast AQMD, you agree to authorize recording of audio and visual content presented during the live event and consent to subsequent use of the recording in the public domain by South Coast AQMD. I'll now turn it over to our Spanish translation to provide the Spanish version.
Muy buenas tardes a todos. Esta reunión se está interpretando al español. Para ver o escuchar la reunión en el idioma de su elección, haga clic en el icono del globo terráqueo que dice Interpretación en la parte inferior de su pantalla. A continuación, seleccione el idioma que desee y una vez que lo haya hecho, si escucha ambos idiomas al mismo tiempo, haga clic en Silenciar audio original. Para quienes participen por teléfono, si desean escuchar la reunión en español, utilicen el número de teléfono y el número de identificación de la reunión que figuran en el orden del día. Los oradores podrán limitarse a un total de 3 minutos o menos para hacer comentarios del público. El encargado de la reunión puede reducir el tiempo en función de la cantidad de personas que soliciten la palabra. En la pantalla se mostrará una cuenta regresiva para cada comentario del público y si necesita interpretación se le puede asignar más tiempo. Las instrucciones para el video en Zoom, para quienes están asistiendo en Zoom y desean hacer un comentario público en la pantalla, hagan clic en el botón levantar la mano. Si está llamando por teléfono, marque *9 para indicar que desea hacer su comentario. Su nombre o parte de su número telefónico sonará cuando sea su turno de comentar y el presentador desactivará su línea automáticamente. Para colgar o abandonar la reunión de Zoom en cualquier momento, siéntase libre de hacerlo. Respete, por favor, el tiempo de uso de la palabra y trate a los demás con cortesía, civismo y respeto. Si no lo hace, su micrófono puede silenciarse o puede ser expulsado de la reunión. Por último, ten en cuenta que esta reunión por videoconferencia está siendo grabada. Al participar en la misma, esta reunión organizada por South Coast AQMD, usted acepta autorizar la grabación del contenido de audio, tanto de audio como visual, que se está presentando durante el evento en vivo y está consciente de que se puede utilizar de manera posterior como parte del dominio público por parte de South Coast AQMD. Back to you, Sarah.
Great. Thank you so much, Daniel, for that. All right, folks, so we have a pretty brief agenda today, so I'll go through quickly welcoming and introductions of South Coast staff. We'll then go into a short presentation of the topic we have on our 2008 8-hour ozone standard plan for Coachella Valley. And then we'll have opportunity for public comment and then closing remarks. So I'll start off. My name is Sarah Reese. You will note that I'm not Ian McMillan, as was noted on the agenda. I'm filling in for Ian, but I'm the Deputy Executive Officer for Planning, Rule Development, and Implementation at South Coast Air Quality Management District. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Sang-Mi Lee.
Thank you, Sarah. So good afternoon, everybody. I'm Sang-Mi Lee. I'm Planning and Rules Manager overseeing AQMP SIP development. So Eric?
Hi, good evening. Eric Prasky. I supervise the state implementation plan development here at South Coast AQMD.
And John, go ahead.
Good evening. My name is Jong-Hoon Lee, Air Quality Specialist, working for Coachella Valley Ozone Plant at South Coast AQMD.
Kayla, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kayla Jordan. I'm also an air quality specialist for the SIP team.
And Barbara, last but not least.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Barbara Baird. I'm Chief Deputy Counsel in the Legal Division and working on this plan as well.
Okay, so that's the South Coast team. We thank everybody for participating this evening. We know your time is valuable, but this is an important topic. And so we hope that we're able to provide some good information and answer any questions that come up. With that, I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Eric Prasky, who will give the presentation.
Thanks, Sarah. All right, so I'll be providing a general overview of the Coachella Valley Attainment Plan for the 2008 8-hour ozone standard. Next slide, please. I'll begin the presentation by providing some background on our agency, as well as discussing ozone air quality trends and the attainment status of various 8-hour ozone standards in the Coachella Valley. Then I'll be discussing how the plan addresses Federal Clean Air Act requirements. Next, I'll be discussing the proposed control strategy, as well as how we use that strategy to demonstrate attainment of the standard. And then I'll be wrapping up with the public process and next steps. Next slide, please. So the South Coast Air Quality Management District is the local air pollution control agency responsible for the South Coast Air Basin and Coachella Valley. Our jurisdiction encompasses all of Orange County, as well as portions of LA, San Bernardino, and Riverside counties. We are the largest of 35 local air agencies in California, as well as across the rest of the nation. And there are over 17 million residents within our jurisdiction. In terms of responsibilities, we regulate emissions primarily from stationary sources with limited authority over mobile sources. We develop and implement plans to meet national air quality standards. We permit and inspect about 28,000 facilities, and we administer over $100 million of incentive funding annually. Next slide, please. The Coachella Valley is the desert portion of Riverside County in the Salton Sea Air Basin and includes cities such as Palm Springs, Indio, and Mecca. It is located downwind of the South Coast Air Basin and is also under the jurisdiction of South Coast AQMD. Next slide. So as many of you are aware, our region has historically suffered from some of the worst air quality in the United States. Despite the significant progress that's been made over the past several decades, our residents still breathe the worst ozone in the nation, and as is the case in the South Coast Air Basin, among the worst fine particulate matter or PM 2.5 levels. However, I will note that the Coachella Valley is in attainment of federal PM 2.5 standards. Next slide. So the reason that we are doing this plan and the reason that EPA establishes health-based air quality standards for ozone is obviously because of the number of very serious adverse health effects associated with ozone exposure that include airway inflammation and damage, aggravation of various respiratory diseases, increased susceptibility to infection, as well as asthma attacks. Next slide, please. So ozone isn't directly emitted, rather it's formed secondarily in the atmosphere through reactions of volatile organic compounds, or VOCs, and nitrogen oxides, or NOx. VOCs and NOx are emitted by a variety of sources, including mobile sources such as trucks, ships, and aircraft, stationary sources such as refineries and power plants, biogenics such as trees and shrubs, and wildfires. So in the presence of sunlight, VOCs and NOx undergo a series of chemical reactions that end up leading to the formation of ozone. Next slide, please. So I mentioned that the Coachella Valley is downwind of the South Coast Air Basin, and the reason that's relevant is because of the large variety and quantity of emission sources in the South Coast Air Basin that dwarf the emission sources within the Coachella Valley. And so due to the sea breeze, actually these emissions as well as ozone that's formed in the basin end up getting transported through the Banning Pass and into the Coachella Valley. Were it not for the South Coast Air Basin, the Coachella Valley likely would attain federal ozone standards. Next slide, please. Okay, so here we're seeing the trend in the annual fourth highest 8-hour ozone over the past few decades in Coachella Valley. Clearly, significant progress has been made over that time period to reduce ozone. However, we do still have a ways to go, especially for the 2008 and 2015 8-hour ozone standards. So note the dashed gray lines. The upper dashed gray line is the level of the 1997 8-hour ozone standard, for which the attainment year was actually last year. While we don't have an attaining design value, so design value is basically a 3-year average of the single year fourth highest values, we did have a clean year in 2023. And so we are in a position to request an attainment date extension for that standard. Next is the 2008 8-hour ozone standard, the topic of today's presentation, and the attainment year is 2031. And then finally, there's the 2015 8-hour standard, for which the attainment year is 2032. However, as part of our 2022 air quality management plan, we did request a bump up to extreme non-attainment, which would allow an additional 5 years to meet that standard. Next slide, please. So there are several ozone non-attainment classifications ranging from marginal to extreme non-attainment. The Coachella Valley was originally classified as a severe non-attainment area with an attainment year of 2026. In 2022, South Coast AQMD requested a bump up of Coachella Valley to extreme non-attainment, and EPA approved that request in March of 2023. And so as part of that approval, they established a deadline of October 7th of this year for South Coast AQMD to develop a new plan addressing the extreme area requirements. Next slide, please. So there are a couple of implications associated with a bump up or reclassification. The first implication is a new attainment year. So in the case of Coachella Valley, that attainment year was extended from 2026 to 2031 when we bumped up to extreme non-attainment. The next implication is a number of Clean Air Act planning requirements that are triggered. And so our plan addresses all of the 15 elements that I'm showing here on the right. I'm not going to go over the details of each and every one of those requirements. However, in this presentation, I will touch upon the emissions inventory, control strategy, and attainment demonstration. Next slide, please. So the control strategy to attain the 2008 8-hour ozone standard relies on phasing in previously adopted rules and regulations. There are three general categories. First is baseline measures. The second is recently adopted stationary source rules. And then finally, recently adopted mobile source regulations. Some of you may be wondering about the control measures that were adopted as part of our 2022 air quality management plan. While those control measures will provide additional emission reductions and assurance that the standard will be met on time, they are not relied upon for attainment of the 2008 8-hour ozone standard in Coachella Valley. Next slide, please. So taking a little deeper dive and looking at the specific South Coast AQMD rules that are contributing to attainment. The first is baseline measures, as I mentioned. These are rules that were adopted by October of 2020, as well as Rule 1109.1 for refineries. Some of you will know that Rule 1109.1 was adopted in November 2021 and is a reclaim landing rule. However, it's not included in that next box because it's included in the baseline due to its significant impact on emission reductions. So this next box, other reclaim landing rules besides 1109.1. So these are essentially rules that have been adopted to implement the regional clean air incentives market transition to a command and control regulatory structure. And they include, for example, Rule 1110.2 for stationary engines, 1118.1 for non-refinery flares, and 1147 for miscellaneous combustion sources. And then there's a third category of stationary source rules. So those are rules affecting non-reclaimed sources. These are essentially all other rules adopted between 2020 and 2023 and include, for example, Rule 1111 for residential furnaces, 1153.1 for commercial food ovens, and 1168 for adhesives and sealants. Next slide, please. So there are also multiple mobile source measures adopted by CARB that are contributing to attainment in 2031. And they cover multiple sectors, including on-road light-duty vehicles, on-road heavy-duty vehicles, off-road equipment, as well as primarily federally regulated sources, such as locomotives. Next slide, please. This slide is providing an overview of the specific regulations that have been adopted by CARB. So in the baseline are CARB's heavy-duty inspection and maintenance, as well as small off-road engines regulations. And then there are a number of recently adopted regulations that were originally called for or proposed in the 2022 State SIP strategy, or in some cases, the 2016 State SIP strategy. And those are the Advanced Clean Cars 2, Clean Mile Standard, Advanced Clean Fleets, Commercial Hovercraft, In-Use Locomotive, TRU Part 1, and In-Use Off-Road Diesel Fueled Fleets. And then so we are, in addition, including EPA's recently adopted Clean Trucks Plan. Next slide, please. So you've heard me mention the attainment demonstration. Essentially, that's the process for how we show that we're going to meet the standard. And it begins with development of a comprehensive emissions inventory of all stationary and mobile sources. And so we develop an emissions inventory for what's known as a base year. In the case of this plan, the base year is 2018. And then we feed those emissions into our air quality model, which is able to simulate ground level ozone concentrations. Next, we develop a control strategy and apply the emission reductions to the inventory. And we do that process for the attainment year. So in the case of this plan, the attainment year is 2031. And then we run those reduced emissions into the air quality model, and we look at the relative change in ground level ozone concentrations between the base year and the attainment year. And that relative change is what enables us to predict future air quality. Next slide, please. So shown here are the changes in NOx emissions for the South Coast Air Basin and Coachella Valley between 2018 and 2031. The reason we're showing NOx is because that is the primary pollutant that's contributing to reductions in ozone levels in the Coachella Valley. And so based on implementation of all those rules and regulations that I discussed earlier, we are anticipating that NOx emissions will be reduced by 52% in the South Coast Air Basin and about 63% in the Coachella Valley. Next slide, please. So with all those emission reductions, and when we run our air quality model, this is essentially the output of that. So as you can see, we're seeing the 2 monitoring sites in the Coachella Valley that have ozone monitors. So this is Palm Springs and Indio. In the 2018 base year, both of these sites exceed the level of the 2008 8-hour ozone standard. However, with all those emission reductions, our air quality model does predict that both of these sites will be in attainment of the 2008 8-hour ozone standard by 2031. Next slide, please. All right, so the public process for this plan began with release of the draft plan on July 31st. Now today we are holding a public consultation meeting. On Friday, we will be briefing our mobile source committee. And then the deadline to submit written comments is August 30th. On September 5th, we'll be briefing the Eastern Coachella Valley Community Steering Committee. And then on October 4th, this plan will be going before our governing board for a public hearing. Next slide, please. So in summary, the Coachella Valley is in extreme non-attainment for the 2008 8-hour ozone standard. And we have developed the draft plan to meet that standard by 2031. The control strategy relies on the continued phase-in of adopted rules and regulations by South Coast AQMD and CARB. As I just noted, the Coachella Valley Ozone Plan will be going before our governing board for a public hearing on October 4th. Should our board choose to adopt the plan, it will be submitted to EPA via CARB. Next slide, please. So all supporting documents, including this presentation, as well as the draft plan itself, are available on our website. You can also point your camera at the QR code shown on this slide to be taken directly to that site. Next slide, please. So as a reminder, please submit all written comments to us by Friday, August 30th. You can submit those via email at aqmpteam@aqmd.gov. If you have inquiries specific to the Coachella Valley Ozone Plan, please direct those to Dr. Sang-Mi Lee. If you have inquiries specific to the California Environmental Quality Act, please direct those to Dr. Farzi Kalaj. Next slide, please. All right, so lastly, I'll just take this opportunity to encourage you to subscribe to our newsletter and be sure to tick the box for AQMP SIP interested parties to be kept informed of any developments regarding this plan, as well as future plans affecting the Coachella Valley. That concludes my presentation. Thank you for your attention. I'll hand it back over to Sarah.
Great. Thank you so much, Eric, for that presentation. All right, at this point, we would like to open it up for public comment. So if folks have public comment they would like to make, please raise your hand and we will get to you in due time. And again, if there's, I don't see anybody on the phone either, so not seeing any public comments so far. I'll just give it a minute. Okay, Mark Abramowitz, I see you have your hand raised. Please go ahead.
Thank you. This is Mark Abramowitz with Community Environmental Services. Am I correct that that this is not going to the AQMP Advisory Committee?
That is correct.
Okay. And is it not required also to go to the advisory committee that's set up in state law to that's made up of medical and other professionals?
Are you, which group are you referring to, Mark?
It's a similar name to AQMP Advisory Committee, and I apologize, I don't recall.
Sarah, maybe I can.
Yeah, go ahead, Barbara.
I think you may be talking about the Advisory Council.
Yes.
And there is a statutory requirement that we have an advisory council, but it's to the district's discretion as to what matters to bring to them. Typically, it's a major AQMP is the kind of thing that we bring to the advisory council. I think we do have a working group for that was involved in the development of this plan. Maybe staff can talk more about that.
Yes, Sangmi, maybe you can talk a little bit about our process.
Yes, sure. So yeah, thanks for the question. So the medical member is required in AQMP advisory group. And then we do have currently advisory group, AQMP advisory group, which includes one medical experts. But as Barbara mentioned, those are we typically for South Coast Air Basins, the plan, and then for the major plan revision. So it was not reconvened for this plan development.
Thank you. And am I correct that the district doesn't believe that it's required to address any of the state ozone standards with respect to preparation of this plan?
Well, this plan is specific for the federal ozone standards. So but measures that we are taking to get down to that federal standard will help to get us down closer towards the California state standard. But this plan is very specific towards the requirements under the Federal Clean Air Act and that federal ozone standard.
I understand that's the purpose, but there are some provisions in the Health and Safety Code that indicate when the district prepares an AQMP that it also has to address state standards.
Well, again, I think to Sangmi's point, this is not what we would consider a major AQMP. We do have obligation to take all feasible measures under the California Health and Safety Code as well as under our federal law, and we are doing that specifically as the emissions impacting Coachella aren't really being generated in the Coachella Valley. They're being transported from the South Coast Air Basin, and we are already under those obligations to take all feasible measures there.
Okay, thank you for the response. One comment on control measures. It would be helpful if the district evaluated looking at implementation of backed and layer using zero emission technologies where they are in fact feasible versus the district's current way of doing it, where the district does not require the use of technologies, even if they are available for a specific purpose. And if the district could look at a baseline and then go out to the end of the plan to see what the difference would be if the district changed its policies toward implementing backed and layer. Thank you. That's all I had.
Appreciate that, Mark. Thank you very much.
I wanted to add one more thing, which is relevant to the advisory council, which is that there is a specific requirement when we're doing a plan for particulate matter to bring that a report on the health impacts of particulate matter to the advisory council. But we also can bring other major plans to the advisory council in our discretion.
Thank you, Barbara. Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands raised or for questions. So going once, going twice. All right, with that, this concludes our public consultation meeting. Thank you, everybody, for attending this evening. I hope it was helpful. Have a good rest of the evening. Bye-bye.